Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining our kitchens, our virtual kitchens, as we move from the I was saying online from the boardroom or from the boardroom table to the kitchen table, and joining us for a conversation about patient engagement with Ray and I. And we'll introduce ourselves here. My name is Bryn Robinson. I'm in New Brunswick and uh, patient engagement advocate for a number of years, working in healthcare. And um, I am so grateful to live and work and play on the land of the Wolastoqiyik, which means the people of the beautiful river. And I'm in Quispamsis, which is also another Wolastoqey word for little lake. I'll turn it over to our hostess with the mostest.
Thanks so much, Bryn. Hi, everybody. My name is Rae Martins. I am out in Calgary, Alberta, and that's where I have the honor to live, work, and play in Treaty 7 territory, representing as well Region 3 communities as well, too. I also work as a knowledge broker in the field of child health research. We have a training program for researchers and people with lived experience. It's a 10-week course on family engagement. And how about we kind of get started talking about what brought us here and why bread? That might be a good plan. I don't know.
I think so. I think so.
Sure.
Yeah. So, well, you had this amazing tweet thread. So we follow each other on Twitter, and I saw this tweet thread, and you had this wonderful analogy and this series of thoughts on how patient engagement is like baking bread, and that there's no one recipe, but there's sort of a underlying kind of process to it. But at the end of the day, there's no one way to do it. And I just love the analogy so much. So what I do sometimes when I see things, like I read papers that I like, or I attend a presentation, or I see something on Twitter, is I'll do up a little infographic. So I did that up and shared it and sent it to Ray.
Absolutely. And it was just such a lovely gift to see something so artistic and just intentional, because that was an opportunity not to just only have an opportunity for knowledge exchange, but it's a very human moment of kindness and connection to have somebody just communicate that to you. And that natural process is something that I think a lot of people kind of don't. They want to quantify it. They want to measure it. They want it to be like, when you're doing engagement, you need, like a BuzzFeed thing, like you can do patient engagement in 6 easy steps, and that's how it all happens. But of course, we know that that's not how this ends up being. And so when we use this analogy in a talk, one of the things that we looked up was, when you Google patient engagement, or not patient engagement, raisin bread, what ends up happening, you get about 2 million hits. Yeah. And the reason for something so conventional, what's kind of unusual about that is, like, well, what makes the difference? Well, you have unified principles. You need flour, you need raisins, things like that. Those will always be the same. But then there are things that you learn from other people. And then there are things that you have that help create and facilitate the goals that you have as well, too. And those things like your personal values, the resources you have, all of those things are going to help you kind of fashion the decisions that you make in terms of whatever you create at the end of the day, in terms of how that contributes to the work that you do. And so when we got talking about this, Bryn came up with this brilliant idea, like, we should just talk about this online and see what people have to say, and maybe have a little bit of a retrospect, talk about lessons learned and things like that. So this is more a social space. If you want to come bake with us, hey, that's cool. Mm-hmm. We're in. If you want to just sit and talk and share your insights, that is totally valid as well, too. And we just ask in this that as this mentioned, that this will be recorded, and this will be housed on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure that that link gets sent to you as well, too, via Eventbrite. And if you need the recipe, again, happy to send that to you as well, too. You can always message me. And if you have any questions or comments, things like that, if you could just at least stay on mute if you're not talking, but if you're welcome to pipe up anytime during the conversation, because we want to make this fun. Not where you just sit and watch two people just randomly banter back and forth and things like that. So we want to make sure that you have a good time here as well too, and we want to learn from you, because that's kind of half the fun about the position that I have, is people can have these opportunities to like have little inspirations and say, "Hi, can we do something with this?" And then it's nice to try. It's nice to innovate and think about like what it means. And part of that has come with talking about the notion of how engagement, and to some degree, honors the philosophies of connection. And food always has that intentional need there as well too. And so that's a big part of that as well. And so yeah, let's get started.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's just. I think that was just it, just trying to come up with something because we've all been, and I mean, especially over the last few years. I mean, so many different webinars and different things, and I love how the community is. We're finding new ways to share knowledge, and I mean, Ray's got this awesome. She's got her TikTok, and I've learned so much from her about that. Like, and just finding new ways to mobilize the knowledge, and this is another way of coming around. I think what like we used to years ago is meet in the kitchen. It's and talk about and share our struggles, but also our successes, and that's really it. So I mean, like it's not we definitely have some questions that we're going that we're thinking about, but it's feel free, you can put them in the chat, and I'll be taking a look at those questions, and I'll bring them up if you don't feel like unmuting and speaking up. But certainly feel free. This is we're all in the kitchen here together, so. Yeah, that's really about it. So let's get started. And I put the links to our Substacks because obviously the family engagement and research course has their Substack, and Rae has hers too. And then I have one. And so I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. So I'll have links in there as well, and the images of the recipes that you shared, Rae, so lovely on online. And I have to say, I did I guess like I don't know, the test kitchen. I did one earlier today because just with time difference, but also make sure to see how it works. So it smells amazing. So I hope if you have a chance, whether it's tonight or another time, to make this. It's really good.
Absolutely. So right now I have in my bowl a teaspoon of salt and a half teaspoon of quick rise yeast. Now, this is a recipe you can go one of two ways, depending on how you feel. If your vibe is quick and just get this out ready to go, you can just toss everything in the bowl and you're good, and you just let it rise. I can be a bit of a geek when it comes to letting that yeast activate a little bit. So I like to add the yeast as well as the warm water and just let that sit for a little bit till it does the bloom thing to kind of get things started. But speaking of letting things bloom, which is a terrible baking segue, shame on me, but
We've
what
got
do
so many of them.
What do you guys feel? What are current practices and engagement in health research that give you hope? This is something anybody can answer.
Absolutely.
I would say, Rae and Bryn, that there's certainly more an emphasis on partnering with family members or patients as partners. Even though I still believe there's a fair amount of tokenism with it, at least it's on the radar, and people feel a responsibility to invite family partners in order to get the grant. But eventually, hopefully, they'll see that the value of partnering and engaging with family members.
That's great. Yeah, so definitely there seems to be a bit of a shift, no question. Linda.
Yes, thank you so much, Ray and Bryn, for hosting this session. I just love the analogy of baking as well, because as I spoke to Ray previously, even just thinking about the ingredients or the resources that we have for family engagement, as Genevieve said, we see the shift more and more towards family engagement. I can also see how there are different ways of doing it. Some definitely not so good ways with being tokenistic, but obviously, of course, the way of how you can do good engagement. And I think even just what we define as successful engagement can really vary And so one of the practices is having that conversation up front with family partners. What do they want to get out of the
Mhm.
partnership? Or are they hoping to do? And so that way it's more of a mutual beneficial relationship and not just one-sided of their input, their involvement benefits just the research. I think it benefits everyone and even the researchers themselves, and how continuously I'm always just so in awe of what I learned from family partners. And it just reminds me of this baking analogy. Every time you bake, for me anyway, I just bake whatever's in my kitchen and what ingredients I have, and I don't always measure precisely what it is. Kind of
Mhm.
like family engagement, right?
Mm.
Thanks.
But and that speaks very highly as well too, Linda, to the fact that you sometimes work from impulse because that's what you have in the moment. But even then, that comes from lessons learned in terms of, you know, that X and Y are truly going to lead you to Z along the way as well too. And that's taking an introspective standpoint to the steps that you take. And that's something that I think is very important in this context as well too, is to learn from the past, not only from your own experiences, but from other people. And I think that's why I think there needs to be more opportunities like this where we can say that we don't consider doing this in a bubble, where it's like, no, I've got this, I'm good. That's rarely the case in that respect, just because we need each other, and that's another aspect of that human connection piece that really it's important.
Mhm. And that trust that you have, Linda, in knowing, like, regardless of what you might have at hand, that something good will come out of it. You know what I mean? Like, you trusting your partners, trusting that, you know, the conversations will still yield. I don't know if that's a baking pun or not, but you know, to yield some, you know, will yield useful, like, um, relationship building and information. And
Oh, very true. Priscilla, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'd love to contribute to the conversation. I completely agree with Linda and Genevieve with the points that they expressed, and I'd like to add as a researcher as well that I appreciate how not only larger funding bodies are acknowledging the importance of including patient and family partners in the research process, but they're really pushing on accountability and impact when it comes to this level of involvement, and ensuring that researchers aren't just tokenistically placing community members or patient family partners on their application, just a consultancy type role, that they truly are playing meaningful roles. And as researchers, you're really having to think and reflect how you're going to be doing that in negotiation and conversation with those you're planning to invite to participate in this work. It's nice to see that level of accountability and pushback from funding bodies as well. And I'm not just speaking to larger tri-council funding. I'm also speaking to smaller bodies of funding that are now emerging across the country from different institutes and centers that are really trying to replicate and promote the importance of this, and supporting in the training of their researchers and staff to be doing good work. And the FER course being one that I advocate quite a bit amongst our members, and helping to shape increasing their capacity and knowledge. So I only see good things on the horizon in terms of this piece.
That's an excellent point. Well, my yeast and water is starting to do its bloom thing, which is just lovely. If we're following along here today in the kitchen, you're welcome to add your teaspoon of salt and your tablespoon of cinnamon as well. Bryn, did you want to take the next question?
Absolutely. Does anyone have any? Well, you know what? Let's talk a little bit about the opposite side of it. You know, certainly lots of things to be hopeful for, but I think there's still lots of good work we could be, you know, we could do as well. So in terms of barriers to regular and meaningful patient engagement in research, what is the biggest barriers in your view? If anyone wants, again, just to raise their hands, unmute, feel free to jump in and share your thoughts. Genevieve.
Certainly one of the barriers we often hear from researchers is lack of time to engage families meaningfully. So, you know, there's grant deadlines, or there's deadlines within just how the research is conducted, period, and publication deadlines. And so, and I think there's also a sense of, they're not going to know what they're doing. So how are they going to value us? I'm just being completely blunt, because
No, absolutely.
I have both hats, a researcher and a family partner hat. So I think I get that sense people are almost afraid, well, you're going to slow me down because you don't really know what you're doing. You might have the family experience or the patient experience, but you don't have the research experience. So I think there's a reluctance there because of those concerns with time. That's one of the biggest barriers.
I would agree. I mean, it's funny. That's it's probably I think I see it as a myth, but I agree with you. Like, and I appreciate your candor in terms of the sharing. You know, in terms of that they're afraid that they'll slow me down because they're inexperienced in this particular area or a particular sort of, I don't know, the nuts and bolts of research, as opposed to, you know, their own lived experience and expertise. And no, that's absolutely. I think they all tie together. I did see. Let's see who hands up here. I think it was Dana first. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I totally agree about time being such a difficulty. I was also thinking about, you know, resources. I feel like there aren't many people doing this work and in this space, and I think that, you know, there's a lot of excitement, and maybe people are starting to really think it's important, but I don't feel like there's often maybe one person and they're supporting so many different researchers, or it's one person who's funded by a grant, and this grant might kind of limit them to a certain amount of hours. So I think find resourcing to be a barrier, because when you want to meaningfully, I guess, engage, that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort, and it's hard to do with limited resources.
Yeah.
Almost a circular, you know what I mean? It's chicken and egg, which one comes first? That's great points you're raising.
Absolutely. And I think to some degree, some of that constitutes some pre-education on that, because there's a buy-in that doesn't really get acknowledged either. I said this in a talk earlier today, if you build it, they might not come. But when you can build it together and start thinking about those motivations that about why a person does that, you start to better understand the demographic that you serve as well too. And that's when people say, well, if so and so does it, that sounds like it might be something worth considering, at least. Danny, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm fairly new to the patient engagement game. I find it aligns really well with my research interest, but also my personal values. But what I have been noticing, I guess, as a barrier as a PhD student is I can maybe afford to have 1, 2, or 3, perhaps, patient partners within my research. And then I find that I have to almost overgeneralize their experience to anyone with their disorder or chronic illness, like all of their experiences as well. Like they represent a whole plethora of people. And that's a lot of pressure for one person to have, for one. And, you know, everyone's experiences are different. And it's also important for me to, I don't know, do my own research and make sure that all experiences are accounted for, and not just my patient partners.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's a great perspective too to have you in your sort of early career researcher role to, you know, to bring that up. And I think, yeah, and I think a lot of folks do worry about that too, is the number, because, you know, they don't. On the one hand, you don't want that, you know, here's my one patient, the tokenist patient, you know, that comes, you know, so therefore they sort of meet all needs, and you're raising the opposite point, which is like, I don't want that. I want to avoid that. And you know, I don't know, what do folks think about that, like in terms of that in terms of that, the idea that that kind of pressure, has anyone encountered that in their own work?
That's a really great comment. And I think part of it is, I mean, obviously there's a need to convey to systems at large that individuals aren't monoliths when it comes to representing. But at the same time, there's also that need for time to go out and make those connections. And what does that look like? And I find sometimes there's a real fear to feeling like you're going to mess up. And that can be in its own way a mental barrier to some degree as well too.
Do you think, Rae, sometimes you just have to, I've come to I don't know, more lately, like you just have to kind of say, yeah, I am going to mess up.
Yeah.
And just be honest about it.
Yeah. And I think to some degree I think one great thing that I did with myself was kind of be introspective. Like, what are your toxic traits? What are the things that you do? I double down. That's my problem sometimes. I want to immediately go, and then I think no, I'm just gonna just stand firm in my spot. But at the same time, I know that there's curiosity is all the more powerful when you can like ask questions and seek the depths of a situation and stuff like that. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to, again, folks jump in, and I see Priscilla, your hands up. I was just going to say though that these kinds of conversations, like let's just be all open and honest about, that we're human and we're going to make mistakes, but if we're coming with good intent, that hopefully we can, move forward from that and build better. But Priscilla, I see you've been very patient with your hand up. Please do go ahead.
Absolutely. It builds off of what we've already been discussing around, again, from a researcher's perspective. There's such an emphasis on the importance and integration of engagement within research right now, but there are a great deal of gaps in how that facilitation of knowledge is being done at the graduate level. And, for clinician scientists who are well within their careers as senior members on their teams, often I get asked the question in my role of how do you start? How do you engage? The very foundational principles. And often folks are looking for checklists, and that's not how engagement works. And it's really breaking down that mindset that this is a formulated way of engaging with patient and community partners. We're talking about a process that requires a great deal of vulnerability on both parts of the researcher and those that are engaging or becoming involved with the project. It's a lot of negotiation. There's a great deal of time that takes place in facilitating that level of trust or building that level of trust, and identifying, priority settings. So there's a lot of unlearning, I guess, that needs to take place within these spaces. And it's finding ways to foster that unlearning, but also providing avenues for support and increasing capacity that's accessible to all folks that are interested in doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing more and more of that being done. And I think for course is an excellent example of that, and how it fosters such a community of bringing interested individuals together and creating space to have these types of conversations where we can just be quite candid about our uncertainties and ask questions that otherwise we would feel embarrassed maybe to ask in our own academic arenas.
So
I love that. I love the unlearning. I love that word, because it's so true. Because you don't learn, you learn how to do research, but nobody talks about this at all.
I feel like in some ways, some of the work that I've done in the past, like with like human rights related things, that I had to unlearn kind of things like aspects of my education in the 80s in my youth, highly colonized and everything's perfect, nothing should change and things like that. But to suddenly get this new facet of information, I realized how much I needed to like bring that out into the world. And I kind of got to a point where I realized that I joked one time with a lawyer that I was doing some stuff with, and I said, I think I become to professionally bum people out for a living when I tell them that, you know, there are some challenges along the way that we need to rectify. The same thing I think comes with understanding just the mechanisms that you have to accomplish, but then also the incredibly painfully human side that gets factored into here as well too. And that's a broad spectrum, because something that could feel technically so empirical might make you bleed a little, and that's an odd dichotomy to kind of wrestle with, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, we're not used to laying it all out there,
No.
laying it bare. But it's, once you kind of get over the discomfort, I think, I don't know, for myself anyway, I mean, I don't know what other folks jump in, but like, I don't know, it feels better. It feels like you've taken care of something. It's like, oh, okay, this is much better than and realizing that everybody just, I think genuinely, most people want the same thing. They want to make things better. And we have different things to unlearn. And that's, I think, what maybe makes us stumble a little bit on our way, but we're all trying to get there.
Absolutely.
How's that bread going?
I was in a brief moment, just to finish up with the dough here. We have 1.5 cups of raisins and 3 cups of flour. You toss it all together and you make kind of a sloppy dough. And you cover it up with a cloth, and the recipe says to let it rest for 3 to 5 hours. But I'm going to cut across the grain here a little bit and tap into the Mennonite roots and say that you can let that sit overnight if you want. I would just recommend putting a tea towel underneath that on the off chance that your bad boy bubbles over. I don't know, but the thing is, it's just going to take that opportunity to ferment if you leave it for overtime. Just, I know that some of you are working from later hours along the way as well too. So, and then the other aspect is that when you have your dough ready, you can just put it out on the counter, and then you just take some, depends on your taste, brown sugar and a bit of maple syrup, and you kind of lay it flat a little bit, and you just spread it all over that bad boy, and then you twist it up, put it in a ball, and then you go bake it. And the other facet to talk about, if you've never done this before, I mentioned there's a conventional method and then the Dutch oven method. Mm-hmm. So if you have the fancy cast iron, what you do is you stick this in the oven at 400 degrees for about 20 minutes to half an hour. And when you put your bread dough in there, you put the ball on top of the parchment, and you stick it in the pot while it's hot, and you're going to hear it sizzle. And then you put the lid on, and then you follow the instructions that we added as well too. And that's that.
Oh, that sounds so. I let mine go for about 5 hours or so rising, and I can see why you say the tea towel underneath. Mine didn't erupt, but I could see after 5 hours why maybe a full night would do that. But I love the idea of the Dutch oven. That sounds like it make a nice, like almost like a sourdoughy crust.
Yeah, it gets very crusty. It's lovely for sure. Speaking of crusty, I need to think of better segues here. I'm not really showing professionalism here.
Yeah, I love this.
It's all good. Yeah. So what do you think is the biggest myth about baking and engagement? What do you think are like the two things that that people should know about either? Doesn't matter. You're welcome to pipe up about either or stick it in the chat as well too. Mm-hmm. I think that when it comes to engagement, the biggest myth that I find is that everybody's cut from the same cloth. Would definitely be the top thing. If one expectation like that, it's always going to be the same path. Yeah, that would be my top one.
That's a good one. For me, I think it's that you can't do it.
Oh yeah.
And I think it kind of, it's that you can't. People are very stout about, I cannot bake, I cannot, it's like, and the same with patient. And I think it's like, well, no, it's sort of back to your original tweet thread. Once you know, there's a few base principles, but to be honest, it's just being kind, just being, kind to yourself and kind to others. And I think let it all unroll from there and be willing to make those mistakes. So, yeah.
I
But
love
see
that you
Sam.
tied the
Yeah,
two together. That's a talent.
took me a while. Sam.
Genevieve, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I see Sam's got her hand up.
Yeah.
Genevieve was first.
Oh, sorry,
thanks.
did not see that.
It's okay. Thanks, Sam. Nothing. I would say what someone has already said. I think Danny said it about one size fits all. That once you have one patient or family partner, then you've got the voice of that whole population, and then you're good. You met the target. You could put the check mark in the box, and you can move on. And often it's the same person again and again that's targeted. So because they're available or they're accessible or they have the time, but it's trying to reach the hard to reach people that are the reason often that we're doing the research to start with. That's harder to get that voice.
So very true. And I think part of it too, it becomes easy. You've done it once and you're like, well, why don't I just go back to this person? But is that ethically sound is another kicker in that conversation for sure.
Yeah, and no, that's good. And I'm seeing a few things here in the chat. Louise was saying you don't need a mentor or a guide, and that's a myth. But yeah, I get absolutely. And just looking here, it was Dana said sometimes I find researchers might be looking for like black and white instructions. Yes, but I find engagement is a lot about relationships. There's no recipe. Absolutely. I don't know who was first. Was it Sam or Linda? Feel free to.
Sam, you were first.
Oh,
Linda. I think for me, one of the things is that like you can go rogue a little bit, and I think in the nicest way possible. But I don't know, I was thinking about the recipe that you sent, Rae, and I was like drifting off to sleep last night. I was like, what would happen if I like soaked my raisins in rum before this? Like what would happen with my bread? Like would it be good? And so I was thinking about like, sometimes it works out and sometimes you just kind of have to like take a chance and build off what you know. Like I was blooming my my yeast water, and I've made bread a bajillion times, like white bread and buns and stuff like that, and it wasn't blooming. And I was like, maybe I'll just like add a little sugar. So I think there's like something to be said about like, you have like the base principles and there's guidelines, but it's trusting yourself, knowing that you can build up other skills that you have to like, course correct. Like I know that the recipe's still going to work out if I add a little bit of this, because I know I've made so many other things. And I think similar can be said in relationships and partnerships, where like you go off your gut, there's a gut feeling, you kind of run with it. And you know it's going to sort of work out. Like rum and raisins are good. If the bread doesn't work out, it's probably still going to be pretty tasty.
Please tell me you did this. Also, that's an amazing point, but please tell me you did this.
I'm going to have to now.
I'm excited for you. That's
yes.
Yeah. I know for myself what I did the first time I made this. I used Sunmade has a raisin mix, and it's like 6 different types of raisins in it, and oh my gosh, just marvelous. Anyway, this is not a sponsored comment, by the way.
This is where the ad cuts on YouTube, and we'll have like 15 seconds of a Sunmade like ad that.
But I didn't do my dance number, Bryn. But yeah, I know. Next time, yeah. Linda.
And I was thinking about how not everyone starts at the same base level either, whether it's even baking. If people have all the tools and the equipment. So that's why I always look for recipes where it's simple and easy to follow along. I think with family engagement, sometimes there's the assumption that everyone knows what you're talking about, even whether that's jargon. Even after partnering with different youth, siblings, and parents as well, sometimes I still find like I throw out jargon until someone asks me about what that term is. And also think about how some partners, they've had experience working on projects before, and then there are others who it might be their first time partnering on projects, so they may not know, like, and you're asking me to share yours, like their stories and input and feedback. It might be their first time in ever doing something like that, and not everyone starts at that same level. It's kind of what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it's so hard though, like jargon. I mean, whether it's baking or engagement, there does seem to be a bit of a lingo that we're trying to get in, even what engagement means, doesn't it? Like you're trying to work your way in. Okay, what do they mean by, by this? And yeah, being clear about the definitions. And absolutely. I see Louise had a comment too. It's sort of related actually, but the terminology being interchangeable, and that's a myth. And that learning the language of engagement isn't necessary. I don't know if you wanted to say more on that, Louise, or if there's another, if anyone wants to jump in and build off of the conversation, some great comments here that we've been having. Oh, that's okay, Louise. See, you can't turn your mic on. That's okay. We got you. I'm glad you could. And I see that Rae's changed location, so her dough must be proofing, I assume. Now, are you gonna go? Are you gonna kind of tap in and go like the full overnight? Or are you thinking?
I'm gonna go full overnight, see what happens. If I end up with an utter disaster, that's okay.
That's okay.
I'm good. I accept my fate, whatever it ends up being.
Well, I think sort of related to that, like, and I think we've been getting, I mean, to be honest, this whole conversation so far has been really great advice. But what about advice that you've gotten for regarding baking and engagement? What has been the best advice that you've gotten?
Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
Just don't wait till you think you're ready to start. And I think that was talked about before. Sorry, I missed part of the conversation, but I want to back up a bit because I want to talk about how preconceived notions can actually guide poor or good engagement. I keep thinking about baking gluten-free, and I am going to try the gluten-free recipe because we have a gluten-free house. But I just remember every time I bake gluten-free, the other people's impressions, well, it must be dry, it must be this, or must be that. So those preconceived notions, when you won't even attempt to try because you think the outcome is not going to be what it's not going to be the same as what you always had.
Well, what a great point. I mean, yeah, and there is that stigma. I'll say it's stigma about gluten-free. A lot of people do think it is kind of that way, but do you think similar? Like go for it.
So, but also to Linda's point, it was, I remembered everybody said when we started gluten-free, oh, you need a stand mixer, need a stand mixer, but all I had was a wooden spoon and a bowl, and it worked. So again, you don't need the fancy stuff.
Good point. Good point.
Now,
for my own, knowledge, why I was gonna say, why do you need a stand mixer? Why do people think you need one? I don't bake gluten-free. I'm not, like, what was the myth that you busted?
That was all the experts were suggesting, and you need extra mixing in order to get things to rise properly and bake properly and not be hockey pucks, pretty much.
Okay.
It reminds me kind of the evolution with patient engagement as well too, is that idea that we talk about different demographics as being, it started off hard to reach, and then it was like, well, that makes that puts the onus on the people who aren't being reached versus and so just watching that change and the choices that we make along the way in terms of and that's that thing about learning from other people, but also intentionally listening to other people, like or learning to bake when you're younger, things like that. I remember, like, I started really early, but I'm in high school and the teacher brings out a mixer because in her mind there is no other way to knead bread than with a mixer, and that's fine. I mean, like, nope, like no judgment there. But I'm in this class of 15 people, and you can imagine what that looked like when we were all standing there with the bowl. And I went, so can I knead my own bread? And she goes, you can do that. Yeah, I'm good. And then I had this like small crowd of people who were just like, ooh, as I'm just pounding this lump of stuff. I don't even remember what we made anymore, what type of bread or whatever, but that thing where you have this preconceived idea and just how you can move when you're just shown a new concept or a new proof of concept and things like that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of people with lived experience here as well too. Would love to hear how you feel about shifting perspectives and being engaged. Would love to hear that. And if not here, you're welcome to share on Twitter as well too. We have our account at FER Course, and would love to hear your thoughts. We can definitely continue the conversation online as well. Moving forward, I think one thing that came up in conversation was the notion. So we always do this thing about evaluation and evaluating how those partnerships went. What are your thoughts on the experience? I can say from my own experience as someone who kind of was a frequent flyer in pediatrics, I hate surveys. I didn't understand their purpose. I didn't understand what I needed to do. It was extra labor. I'm also filling this out with a clipboard while trying to chase my very active young child. And some of the questions would be hilarious, like list your inpatient stays, and they'd have like 4 lines. And I remember I saved it on Facebook, like, I laugh at your 4-line inpatient stay. Like, it should have been at least 5 pages kind of a thing. So how do you, for me, I feel like there's a need to change that perspective to some degree with the people that I support to help them better understand that that's a form of investment in that partnership, and saying like, yes, this was great, or actually let's learn from that. And so I think there's some things to probe in there where it's not just like, here, fill this out and thank you for your service or anything to that effect. Anyone else have any thoughts on that subject?
And I appreciate your perspective. Oh, Linda, yes.
And I think regarding engagement and the evaluation of it, it's not just a one-time thing. It's also not a survey. It can also be conversations throughout the whole process, throughout the project, even thinking about reflective conversations. I think those conversations can help to build relationship and opening it up for honest feedback, and how we can improve on working together as a team. I think sometimes those are difficult conversations, but it kind of relates to what we talked about earlier with trust and admitting that sometimes you don't know what you're doing. Or I remember when I first partnered with my sibling partners and being honest that this was the first time that I ever facilitated such a group, and that there were going to be like limited resources. I had no funding for compensation at that time. How can we work together in a way that we can truly partner and they can be involved as much as they want or step back when they need to? Yeah, I think throughout we always just have more conversations about how our partnership was going. I mean, I still included a survey, and that provided a chance for anonymous feedback if that's what they wish, but also to open it up. They could and they share their perspectives in meetings or send me an email. Yeah.
That's great. And I think I like the notion of continuous improvement. We hear that in other spheres, but not necessarily when it comes to engagement and evaluation. And it's not a one-time thing. And I appreciate the perspectives that, in terms of the folks may not be willing or may not be in the right space to, or have the right dynamic to share that open and honest feedback that we need. The question originally, I think this was last week, Ray. I think I tweeted something about that to that effect, was that because and from my perspective, where we would get consultations from physicians about, and I'm trying to, let's why don't you engage patients in your research studies? Like, I'll help you with your methods and blah blah blah. But how about this piece? And I was always asked for evaluation data to basically justify why they should bother. You know what I mean? In terms of like, why go to the effort? And I will say less and less and less so. I think they've, you know, I think there has been a slow movement, but I guess I've always kind of bristled a bit because I thought, well, gosh, I don't evaluate my other coworkers. And if I see you as my coworker, as a partner in this, but I think yourself, Ray, and there was other folks that kind of kindly said, well, yes, but there are times, of course, that folks aren't, it might not be there yet. And so that you do need these tools and evaluation to get it out there and to start that dialogue. So just throwing that out there as well for another.
Absolutely. And I think what was interesting about this whole raisin bread analogy was it blossomed into a very interesting conversation about evaluation and perceptions of evaluation from one side. And they talked about the notion of it feeling like conformity, like if you answer this wrong, you fail the test, no more partnering, or just that
right,
that feeling. And like I could see where that comes from, as if that there are that outcomes are supposed to align with a certain standard, but that might be something uniquely different for someone else. So that's why I appreciate, Linda, the fact that you had sort of different options to kind of draw unique information from, which is so interesting.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if I didn't provide options, I can get how it can be awkward to provide feedback and for them to, for my partners to share their perspectives. Not everyone may be comfortable, and people may like different formats. Or whatever, I had a meeting where not everyone could have attended and they want to provide feedback, and I just want to open up the opportunity that the feedback can be in different formats.
I just have to highlight Louise's comment. Baking equals engagement when you do something the same thing multiple times and it turns out different each time.
Love it.
Accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
My goodness. Anyone else have any other thoughts or comments on the we've sort of the different topics we've touched upon so far?
When it comes to talking about the best advice when it comes to engagement, I think part of, honestly, the best thing I can say is do it. But part of that is because I came from the lived experience side and moved into this field, and I've lost count how many people that I've had an opportunity to share why this is beneficial, and why it works, and just understanding people's stories and the diversity of it. And had I not been exposed to that idea, I feel like I would have missed out on a very rich path that it's been in terms of how wide this community is, but how small a world it can be sometimes. Like, I just think about how many people are here and the interconnected nature of that. Like, Bryn, you and I come from different worlds, and to suddenly come together, and we've just introduced a new contingent of people together to say, like, hey, this is all something we're all mutually invested in. Danny, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if folks in this meeting have any recommendations or suggestions for resources as someone who's just starting patient engagement research. If there's any go-to website or articles or even books that they know of at the top of their head, I would love to hear about it in the chat.
Great question.
I think one that sits at the top of my mind is not the power of kindness. Sorry, Why We Revolt. I think it's by Dr. Victor Montori. And what I love about that is it talks about the push and pull of healthcare systems, but I think that it has some carryover to research as well too, is industry versus humanity, and that push and pull, a notion of care and what that looks like. And I think understanding that exchange and relationship helps you kind of have a clearer vision of what the path that you kind of want to take in it. That kind of be the first thought in my mind anyways. I don't know, Bryn, do you have any certain thoughts on the subject?
Oh, goodness. And I just threw that link to that book. I'm going to have to look that one up. I always love that. Yeah, I guess like Bird's Eye View and Ducks in a Row, Sue Robbins. there's so many good pieces of like in her writing and what she shares. And but the one that really sticks with me is the idea that, you know, people talk about the system, the healthcare system, as this sort of other, and, you know, acknowledging that we are all part of the system, so we can change the system. And I just love that. I find that it's such a hopeful, empowering notion. And so that would be my suggestion, Danny. I mean, I've got lots of lots of suggestions, but I think those two. And I don't want to ignore, though. I mean, I see that Jan, you had a nice comment here, and you know, yeah, we're kind of like sort of just kind of going back to some of the other things we were talking about, you know, in terms of, you know, the differences of different chefs in the kitchen from what I'm sort of reading here, and that basically, you know, that there's humility, accepting to be wrong, and, you know, share the results, know how to listen to improve. That's a really good point. Know how to listen to improve. Absolutely. But yeah, that would be my suggestion. Does anyone else have any immediate resources you could share with Danny, or your own favorites?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, and a little bit biased, we have this course, the Family Engagement and Research course. And actually, if you Google that term, yeah, you'll find it. And what it ends up being really is not about like methodologies or things like that, but more about like creating authentic relationships and what that means. In the end, you actually co-design a tool on family engagement with people with lived experience. And so that can be an experience in and of itself if you feel like you need that like non-judgmental space to kind of practice that. But when it comes to engagement as a whole, I think as well too, Brian Goldman's book on the power of teamwork is one that really kind of has that opportunity to think about what those exchanges should look like in collaboration. And after I read that one, I started thinking about like the most popular question I've gotten as someone who works in engagement. The one that I frequently hear from the families that I support is, can I speak up and ask a question? And I thought, what an interesting question to consider, because I think part of that is that perceived power imbalance thing that people have. And to some degree, you do notice that like all through the relationship that there's the stuff that you come in, those preconceived notions. In that area, there's kind of it's a bit of a shock to suddenly humanize people where you've had more of a transactional relationship in health systems beforehand, and to kind of warm up to those ideas is that in and of itself its own catharsis. And that's been a surprise. And I think to some degree, some of the people that I support, because of that, they suddenly realize, oh, I'm not just a function of care. I'm a person with interests and capabilities. And in some cases, it's been people who suddenly see like that's a life-changing revelation. And that, so from that notion of creating that team and that environment of being a team, that's been a very valuable facet of what I do. Anyways, I don't know, Bryn, if you had any other thoughts as well too.
I have to dig back into I have a sort of tickle trunk, and that's a dated reference for people of a certain age, but a tickle trunk of resources, like references that folks like yourself, Rae, that and Don Richard shares, and I know I see Annette was on the call, like she would share as well. And yeah, like I think you know, even what started the journey for me was the how not to do patient engagement tweet thread. Honestly, like, I mean, I was at Bardis for a number of years, but I didn't find it was inching along. It wasn't really, you know, to be, I guess, sort of out there with that, you know, blunt. But then I saw that tweet, sort of the hashtag. It was like a Sunday morning, and I'm getting my coffee, and I just started going down this rabbit hole, and it just blew my mind, like how, I mean, the vulnerability and the honesty, but I was just appalled at the things that were in. But it was like the wake up call. And I think if you search for that hashtag on Twitter, I would say there's a great place to start. How not to do patient engagement, and I'll throw that in the chat here. But there's so many references attached to that as well, and there's the opposite to how to do patient engagement as well.
No,
And
absolutely.
people are sharing great resources.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, taking
Oh, absolutely. Matters of Engagement is a great podcast.
yeah.
One of the hosts is a dear friend and an ethicist as well too. And so the first time I actually met them, they kind of poked several holes in the subject, and I was gutted, but in that way where you're just like, oh, that's a hard thing to
Yeah.
hear, but also let's be friends.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh, I see we've kind of come to our time here. Is
My
there any
goodness.
final thoughts on the subject? This is such a random idea that we came up or that Bryn came up with. I would say I'm giving you credit for that. And I'm just grateful for this opportunity to have these exchanges tonight. This was
I'm
lovely.
grateful for you to be on board for this and listen to the crazy ramblings of someone on Twitter.
Well, it's lovely to put faces to people as well too, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah. So
I would definitely say don't be shy. If you see us on Twitter, you know.
So if you have any more questions or thoughts and things that you'd like to contribute, you can go to @FERcourse on Twitter, and happy to chat a little bit further as well too. And thank you again for coming, everyone. You have a lovely night.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for joining.
Thank you so much too.
Glad to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much.